Thank you for joining. We have the other video, the video of your lecture. So they just want recordings of people who were so influential in SENTAC. And obviously you're one of them. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for doing this.
What year did you start getting involved in SENTAC?
Well, I was not in the ground floor of SENTAC. That was Bob Rubin and Culbertson. I guess the early 1970s. I first started my job as a pediatric otolaryngologist in 1974. And I'm sure I heard about SENTAC by 75, 76. So I was not at the ground floor, but I joined very soon after. So none of it was my idea. I just joined as soon as I heard about it. It was just, we remember that that Jerry Healy and myself and Pottsick all started about the same time. Bluestone started a year or two later, early 74, 75. So I'm sure we were all approached about the same time. Let's say 75, 76. And I was can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
So I was a general otolaryngologist, and then became a general pediatric otolaryngologist. And subsequently, I remained a general pediatric otolaryngologist my entire lifetime with a general interest in airway. But SENTAC, early on in the mid 70s, it was about communication, about kids who couldn't hear and kids who couldn't speak. So this was an exciting time for me to learn about aspects of pediatric otolaryngology I had never really learned about in residency. So this was a learning experience for me.
So who was the person who encouraged you the most to get involved in SENTAC, would you say?
I honestly can't remember. I guess we probably need to put it to Bob Rubin, but I honestly don't have a recollection of who first called me. But I think I was present in 1980. So someone must have been calling me in 1975, 76. I'd probably been to a couple of meetings. I certainly had met all the senior people who had started SENTAC. And I think I was present in 1980. And it was a totally different flavor of a society that I had never, it wasn't the true academic society that we were used to joining, the bronchosophageology and laryngological and the head and neck society. This was a totally different flavor, and it was really a very nice flavor of a meeting.
In what way? Just in the camaraderie, or
the camaraderie with there were several pediatricians involved in those early days, more than there are now, and the audiologists, and the speech people, and some otolaryngologists, and all this was a new vista for me in terms of how to handle communication skills in children. I hadn't really thought when I started at Children's about all the communication issues. So this was a huge learning experience for me, because my job at Children's was primarily pediatric otolaryngology in the community, in the immediate community, in Cincinnati and the surrounding area. And all the secondary stuff, such as teaching and residence and fellowships and airway surgery, that was all icing on the cake. But my main purpose of being at Cincinnati Children's was to set the standard for pediatric otolaryngology in the community. So I had to develop my skills to learn about audiology and speech, stuff you don't learn in residency. I didn't learn it in residency, which is essentially essentially a general otolaryngology residency. And I'm one of the few people who didn't have a pediatric fellowship because there were no fellowships. So we started the fellowships by 1980, I think. So this was a huge education for me, and it made a huge impact on my career as setting the standard locally for pediatric otolaryngology care.
Well, you did a great job. Everyone, when you ask new residents, everyone says they want to be just like you.
Well,
So
yeah,
you really did set a standard.
well, it
So,
taught me
you know,
how to relate
really,
to
it's amazing.
it taught me how to relate to audiologists and speech, and realize that
Right.
our pediatric otolaryngology was primarily about communication skills, primarily allowing children the best way to communicate as they grew older. And of course, airway surgery is a lot about communication skills with developing a voice, but that's very secondary in my mind. I mean, airway surgery is not part of SENTAC. The primary part of SENTAC is communication and the value with pediatricians, audiologists, and speech. And it still is that way to know. A large number of speech involved in SENTAC. And as you all know, this is a pretty unusual father-daughter combo here, because Stephanie, my daughter, was president 40 years after I was. Not many societies can boast that.
I know.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
Isn't that
cool.
amazing?
It's cool.
Yeah, from generation to generation, because you influence so many people with your enthusiasm. So that's what I think, I'm just trying to capture, how do someone like you, actually just starting basically from scratch, generate such enthusiasm with so many people over these years. Is just truly a phenomenon.
Well,
and it all seems very positive.
Well, I was a only child of an only parent with an only mother who was a professionally successful. She was a headmistress of a large girls, what we call them grammar schools in England. And she instilled in me learning and teaching. That's where I got my teaching. I can't teach people unless I learn in the first place. So SENTAC, the first decade, was just a mega learning experience for me. And I was like a sponge. I soaked it up. I learned it. I loved it.
Yeah. It really, and I think it is a very welcoming environment, because how many societies are you members of?
Well,
ASPO, ABA, are you American Laryngology too, ALA?
Yeah, I was the American Head and Neck Society, the usual, all the usual ones. The only one I was not a member of, I think, was the otology one, because that was an adult otology field. But I was probably a member of most of the others. And I'm glad to see that SENTAC is now carrying on this same vein. I would like to see more audiologists join SENTAC. I'm not sure the membership numbers, but I see physicians and speech. I think some more audiologists. And I think, I'm not sure about pediatricians now, because back in the 70s when this started, if I look at my hospital, the pediatricians ran the hospital. So of course they were part of our societies, but then, 2 decades later, the hospital is run by hospitalists and by residents, and the primary care pediatricians are permitted into the hospital now on occasion, as opposed to being an integral part of it. So I am not sure. I think the value of pediatricians in the early part of SENTAC was appropriate. And I'm trying to rationalize why there are very few pediatricians in SENTAC now, and I think this is the reason for it. But increasing numbers of speech and audio, particularly, we need to get more audio involved, it seems to me, because it's all about communication. So how long have you been in SENTAC? When did you join SENTAC?
Well, as you know, I finished my residency with Bob Rubin, and Bob Rubin was all about SENTAC because he
Absolutely.
really was, even as residents, he was always doing multidisciplinary things. So he had a night meeting that he met with the neurologists and audiologists about children with hearing loss. So everything for him was actually working in teams. So Linda and I started going early on. We presented a paper there about subglottic hemangiomas, where we evaluated the autopsy specimens of kids internationally with subglottic hemangioma. But I think we were going to present it at SENTAC, and then at the last minute he decided we should present it at the ABA. So, you know, he had allegiances to a lot of places, but he always encouraged us as residents to, you know, do all his projects that he had ideas for. And he had, I guess, so much funding that we didn't even have the concept of writing a grant. I mean, we just did the project. So
Right.
we did a study on the tracheal mucosa changes on beagle puppies at post tracheostomy. So I can't even believe I did
I thought Clarence
trachs
Sasaki was
on beagle puppies, but that
Clarence
was his
Clarence
idea.
Sasaki
So we did
that.
it.
Yeah, Clarence Sasaki did that sort of work as well. And was Clarence Sasaki
I don't know. We did.
close to you?
We did it at Einstein.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure.
No,
Sasaki
he was at Yale. We're
yes.
in Einstein.
Yeah.
So.
And he had a classic paper on change of tracheal mucosa when you put a trach in. Classic paper. So it's good to know that you were part of that important group.
Well, that was actually that was yeah. I don't know. I don't think he was on our paper, but it's funny because that paper still gets referenced, and I get notification that paper gets referenced. But I think the other thing that was nice about SENTAC, and that's what he included us in, is that he said, you know, it was a nice audience for a young resident to present papers that,
and that, you know, still is it's absolutely the truth today.
And it was it was welcoming, like people didn't get torn apart for going there. And also, as the idea of this multidisciplinary has just kind of become mainstream in children's hospitals, but it wasn't at that time, you know, of having all the disciplines working together. So
correct. Yeah,
I think that I mean, that's been really remarkable. So who do you think? So there was Bob Rubin, there was Culbertson, and there was Sylvan Stool, who started it. I think there was one other person.
Yeah, there was. Okay, said it was stopped.
Anyway, I guess the other thing that people wanted to know is it's going now. What advice would you give to new young people in otolaryngology as to, you know, what they can do for the future, what things should be looked into, what are some of your ideas that you weren't able to accomplish since you retired? What things you would like evaluated more carefully?
I think the biggest question for me is evaluation of tracheomalacia. I mean, I work with Bob Wood, who's a premier pulmonary bronchoscopist, and he and I, for several years, thought we would try and come up with a classification of tracheomalacia, and we couldn't. So I see that as a relatively big issue within certainly pediatric otolaryngology and airway. The trouble or the beauty or the success of pediatric otolaryngology, it encompasses so many parts of the systems of the head and neck. I mean, the adults do the head and neck, we do the head and neck. The sinus, we do the sinus. They do implants, we do the implants. I mean, we do the airway, we do the airway. And there's so much to know in pediatric otolaryngology. There are not many general pediatric otolaryngologists left. And I think my advice is you have to be a generalist first in pediatric otolaryngology. And when you've got that experience, then you can decide where you want to go. I mean, one of the biggest questions is what's going to replace cochlear implants? I mean, from my perspective, cochlear implants were the single biggest advance in pediatric otolaryngology over my career. The difference in the mid-90s when kids were implanted is huge, huge for communication. We went from almost the Middle Ages to the modern age, and I wonder what the next reiteration of cochlear implants will look like. And I think that's one of the big questions. And then we, talk about regeneration of hair cells, and we talk about the cochlea, because it's isolated and it's from everything else, but its bony shell and one blood supply is the ideal place to inject drugs or growth hormones or inject genes or whatever it is to make things better. I think that's a huge area and will benefit a large number of people. If you look at the number of deaf children, that's huge. Many more deaf children than are children with subglottic stenosis. Many more.
Right. And what other areas would you think of for the young people to be looking into? Because there's a certain amount of charm and fascination with doing airway surgery. And I think that you started a lot of that just with your enthusiasm and your teams getting involved in that. So that actually made such huge progress. I mean,
that's a small number of patients. I mean, ear surgery covers so many more patients than the airway. And I think the whole area of pediatric sinusitis and the snotty-nosed kid is still up for grabs. There's a lot of work to be done in the upper airway, and particularly, and the whole black box is the upper airway above supraglottis, base of tongue, and sleep apnea. That's a huge black box, which is slowly being sorted out. But there's a good operation for subglottic stenosis. There's not a good operation for base of tongue and pharyngeal collapse in upper airway. There just isn't yet. And I think that's an area which needs to be pursued as time goes by. So,
what is your interest in sleep apnea?
Well, my interest is that because I became really aware of sleep apnea totally apart from the tonsil issue with the Downs patients I saw. And then with the airway issues, you fix the airway and the tracheal the subglottic stenosis, could decannulate them because of the upper airway. And I think in the 70s and 80s, I didn't realize how important the upper airway was, and no one really did. And the whole idea of sleep apnea, awake endoscopy was a program starting in the 90s, and I became more and more aware as I was evaluating the children with airway issues, how important to evaluate the upper airway with a flexible endoscopy and not just a rigid endoscopy in the airway. So I became more and more attuned to the problems with sleep apnea as I was developing.
With the dynamics of the airway.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that people are interested in that now.
Yeah, I think they're very interested in it now. I mean, that's the whole beauty of the field, I think, is there's so many things that still people can look into and evaluate. I'm trying, my daughter Rebecca, not the one that you saw, my other daughter just finished her pediatric dental residency. And, there's a big flurry about, the upper airway and the palate and the tongue ties being involved with sleep apnea.
Right.
And I think there is a part of us that needs to look at that more carefully as well. So it's pretty fascinating how we can get all these, specialties involved in it, from my point of view.
Yeah. If I were
It's
young
really,
otolaryngologist these days, I'd be excited. Very excited. There's
Yeah.
so much unknown stuff. I'd like to be on the fly on the
Yeah.
wall 20 years from now, see what's going on. So
yeah. So how do you want to continue to be involved? Are you going to still come to meetings, or what are you going to be doing? Are you going to come to the 50th?
I'll come to the 50th, but I promised myself, having observed older people at meetings, I promised myself 20 years ago that when I retired, I was not going to go to any meetings. I was not going to try and present. As I can say, I had a good innings, and it's time for me to move on. I have not been back in the hospital since the day I left. When I left on the Friday afternoon, after a week of parties, I had this sinking feeling in my stomach, and I thought, how long is this going to last? I woke up the following morning, a Saturday morning, it had passed, gone, and it's never come back.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have never.
So what have you been doing?
Well,
are you doing a lot of traveling?
Well, I have a house in England. We go over there like for 4 months of the year. I have all my grandkids. I have 11 grandkids. I have daughters in various locations. I have a book club. I took a course from the Ohio State on becoming a volunteer naturalist, which is fun.
Wow.
I volunteer for a local raptor organization, rescue birds. We go and feed them and clean the poop out of the cages on Saturday mornings.
Wow.
I took up the piano, which is, I played the piano. I was always musically inclined, but I'd played the clarinet for many years. So I took up the piano. I have this lovely piano teacher who's about a year younger than me, and she's perfect. She just feeds me the music, what I like, and encourages me. No pressure to, be the best or anything. I just enjoy it. And I enjoy the piano very much because you have to concentrate. You totally forget everything else. And when your mind wanders to something else, you start playing wrong notes. So I'm doing plenty. So
yeah. When did you start playing piano?
The day after I retired. Saturday, the day after.
Oh, did you play it?
I played for a couple of years. I played a couple of years when I was a child. So I know music. Now I play clarinet for 10, 15 years. So music has always been integral to me.
Oh, wow.
So that's it. And
what instruments did you encourage your children to play?
Piano, violin were the three that were around here. And then a couple of them didn't play too much, but whatever they want to do, they became athletic. Well, all of them became athletic. As you know, the models that you give to the children, they assume and they pass on to their grandchildren. They can see that very, very nicely.
How old are your grandchildren? You said you have 11 grandchildren. How old are they?
8 to 21.
Yeah.
We have 3 grandchildren.
Oh my goodness.
3 children going to Ohio State in 2 weeks.
Really?
So
oh my goodness.
So they're doing their shopping around my house here to take to college. So.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's great. So you'll be able to see them a lot.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to move on. I've got, as you say, when you retire, you're so busy, you don't recall how you possibly got stuff done when you were working.
You have to do a lot of things at the same time. That's the whole thing, is that you obviously are very good at multitasking, right?
Well, Yeah, I
They
think
say,
so.
they say women are better at multitasking, but you are obviously a very excellent multitasker.
Well, I was brought up by a mother, so I learned a lot from her.
Yeah.
I really did learn a lot. from her.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm proudest
What
of,
year is she? She's
oh no, she
is
died 20 years ago. But I tell you, one of the things I'm proudest of in my fellowship is that last year, Catherine Hart, one of our colleagues, sent
yes.
me this picture. We have 6 fellows, 3 each for 2 years. And there were 6 female pediatric fellows, which to me wouldn't be remarkable. But she said, thank you for creating an environment where we can have 6 pediatric fellows. And to me, that's normal, but
Right.
it's remarkable for some people, apparently.
Yeah, well, that's
Oh.
why I think I was lucky, because I didn't think it was unusual, because Dr. Rubin likes women. So we always had women in our residency.
Absolutely.
And it was like, to me, it wasn't like unusual when people talk about, you know, being discriminated against or this or that. I don't think I ever, I mean, maybe to a little degree, but it wasn't like the feeling that I had. I felt like I was being encouraged. And thank you for being that type of person as well.
Well,
We appreciate people.
It's just part of, I realize I was brought up sort of gender blind and colorblind, and
Right.
which has stood me in good stead. I still feel like that. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Right. Yeah.
well, be nice,
Me too.
nice talking
Anyway,
to you.
God bless you. Thank you for
And
everything.
you too. And you too.
Thank you for everything. Take good care of yourself. All right.
Yeah,
We'll
and you
see
too,
in
Nina.
Philadelphia.
Take care. I will. I'll see you then. Okay.
All right. Sorry.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.